Masechet Baba Mesia Daf Saditet Nu Mishnah. השואל את הפרה ושילחה לו ביד בנו, ביד עבדו, ביד שילוחו, או ביד בנו, ביד עבדו, ביד שילוחו של שואל, ומתה פטור. Someone is borrowing a cow from someone else, and the sender, the owner of the cow, sends it with his own son, or his slave, or his messenger, that is the sender's, the owner's messenger, but without the agreement of the receiver, or even if it's sent in the hands of the son, the slave, or the messenger of the borrower, but without the agreement of the borrower. The sender just happened to see, oh look, that's his slave over there, that's his servant. Hey, take this, right? We agreed that your father, your master, is going to borrow this cow, so just take it. But the borrower never agreed to sending it with him, and let's say it dies on the way. In all of these cases, the borrower is not responsible because he never received it. Only once he receives it, it enters into his hands or onto his farm, into his domain, then he is responsible. But the travel, that's the owner is responsible, and even it doesn't matter who he sends it with, whether someone that belongs to his household or to the borrower's household, because he didn't have agreement of the borrower to say, yes, I authorize that, so the sender is responsible. Amar lo hashoel, shalecha li biyad beni, biyad abdi, biyad shiluchi, o biyad bincha, biyad abdecha, biyad shiluchacha, o shama lo hamash'il, harini mishalecha lecha biyad beni, biyad abdi, biyad shiluchi, o biyad bincha, biyad abdecha, biyad shiluchacha, ve'amar lo hashoel, shalach, v'shidcha ometa, hayav. So second paragraph is the opposite of the first. Here, there is agreement of the borrower that he is taking responsibility for the travel. And here it doesn't matter who initiates and who is sending it, as long as the borrower agrees. So we give lots of examples. In this case, let's say the borrower says, send it with my son, my slave, my messenger. Or the borrower says to the owner, send it with your son, your slave, or your messenger. Or it could be that the sender, the owner, initiates and says, I am going to send it with my son, my slave, my messenger. Or the owner says, I'm going to send it with your son, your slave, or your messenger. And the borrower gets the message and says, okay, yes, send it. I authorize that. And he sends it. In that case, since the borrower agreed to it, and if something happens along the way, then the borrower is responsible, right? Because he said so. He said, I'll be responsible from the time that you give it into the hands of whoever is taking it. And all this is true in the flip side when the borrower is returning it to the lender. The borrower is responsible until it gets to the owner's domain, unless the owner agrees and says, yes, send it with my messenger, send it with your son, and so on. So the sender in all cases is responsible for the travel time, unless the borrower agrees, I'll be responsible from this period and on. Okay, the Gemara asks, Biyad abdo hayav, yad ebed ki yad rabbo. So in the second paragraph, where there is agreement, it says that even though the sender, the owner, sends it with his own slave, because the borrower agreed, the borrower is liable. But we ask about that. A slave's hand is like the hand of the master. We saw that above, that a slave is like an extension of the hand of the master, and therefore, even though the borrower agreed, yes, you can send it with your slave owner, with your slave, right, owner of the cow, and he does so, but still it never leaves the domain of the sender, because it's his own slave. His slave's hand is like his own hand. So therefore, the borrower should not be responsible. Amar Shemuel be'evet ivri de la kani le gufe. We have two answers. Shemuel says, we're talking here not about evet kana'ani. Evet kana'ani is true. The hand of the slave is like the hand of the master. But evet ivri retains his full selfhood, and the owner does not own the hand of the slave. So that's what we're talking about when the borrower agrees that the sender will send it in the hand of a Eved Ivri, that's an independent person. And since he agreed, the borrower is liable. Rava amar afilu tema be'eved kanani nasa ke'omer le hakisha b'makel v'hi tabo. Rava amar, I can even say it's talking about Eved Kanani. And the reason is because it would be the same as if the borrower said, listen, send the cow on its own. Just hit the cow with a stick and it'll get here, right? It knows the way, and it'll get here. Now, it happens to be that the owner's Eved Ivri is walking alongside it. Good, that's only a benefit that to make sure that supervising, it'll make sure to go the right way. But really, it's coming independently. Basically, the borrower is accepting responsibility for it, dependent of the person that's walking alongside it, right? So it's the same as if he said, hit it with a stick and it'll come on its own, the borrower would become responsible. So here also, even though the Eved Kanani is walking alongside it, it's not really in the hands of the Eved Kanani, he just happens to be there. It would be the same as if he wasn't there. Metibe, hashoel parav shedacha lo biyad beno, biyad shilucho chaya, biyad avdo patur. Now we have a challenge from a Baraita that says if someone borrows a cow and the sender sends it in the hands of his son or his messenger, he's liable. We're assuming we're talking about with agreement. So because the borrower agreed, so the borrower takes on liability the second that it gets into the traveler's hands. However, biyad avdo patur, if it goes to the hands of the slave of the sender, then the borrower is not liable. So this is the opposite of our Mishnah. So according to the answer of Shemuel, we can explain it simply. The Mishnah is talking about Eved Ivri, who retains his own selfhood, and therefore when he brings it, it's with the agreement of the borrower. So that's it. The borrower agreed that he wants it. And he takes responsibility, and it leaves the owner's domain because it's in the hand of it's in the hands of an Eved Ivri who is his own person. Whereas the Braita that says Biad Avdo Patur, that's talking about an Eved Kanani who is an extension of the hand of the master, and therefore, even though the borrower agreed and said yes, send it, still it would be as if the owner himself was bringing it. Let's say the owner himself was pulling the cow all the way and something happens. So obviously the owner himself would be responsible, never left his domain. So same thing with the Eved Kanani. So Shemuel can reconcile two sources easily. But according to Rav, how will he reconcile the two sources? Amar lach Rav, la tema na'asa ka'amar le, ele ema be'amar le, hikisha b'makel v'hi tabo. So Rav says, don't say that in our Mishnah, when the borrower says, yes, send it with your slave, that is not as if he hit the cow, but rather the Mishnah is only talking about a case where he actually said, hit the cow and let it come on its own. So you actually have to verbalize it. It's not implicit. Therefore, we reconciled as follows. The Mishnah, even though the Mishnah and the Baraita don't delineate anything about hitting the cow, he's assuming that the Mishnah is talking about a case where the borrower said, hit the cow and let it come on its own. And happens to be the Eved Kanani is walking with it. That's the case of Eved Kanani, but really the animal's coming on its own, and the borrower takes full responsibility for whatever happens to the cow, and it leaves the domain of the owner. Whereas the Braita is in a case where the borrower did not say hit the cow with a stick and let it come on its own. There is just walking with the Eved Kanani, and so the Eved Kanani is an extension of the master's hand, and that's why it never leaves the owner's domain, and therefore the borrower is not responsible if something happens on the way. And we're going to prove this concept here. Ditemar hashileni paratcha v'amar lo biyad mi v'amar lo kishav makel v'tabo amar Rav Nachman amar Abba Abu amar Rav kevan sheyasad meshut mashil meta chayav. We know that the hitting thing works because we have the following statement. If someone says, lend me your cow, and the owner says, who should I send it with? and the borrower says, don't send it with anybody, just hit it with a stick, kick it out of your domain, and it'll come to me. And Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabba bar Abu, in the name of Rav, once it leaves the domain of the owner, the lender, if it dies, the borrower is liable, because the borrower said, I'll take responsibility for anything that happens on the way. Nema Mesia aleh. The following Baraita seems to support the same rule, because it's exactly the same words. Hashileni paratcha v'amale b'yad mi v'amale hekisha b'makel v'hitavo kevan sheyasad meshut mashil u'meta chayav. Someone says, lend me your cow, and the owner says, with who should I send it with? And the borrower says, just hit it with the stick and it'll come. Once it leaves the domain of the owner and it dies, then the borrower is liable. So this looks exactly the same. It looks like it would be a good proof, but not necessarily. Amar Rav Ashi, hacha ma'izkinan kegon she'ayta chasero shel lifnim mechasero shel mash'il tichi meshalecha la v'adai lehatam azla. Rav Ashi says you can't generalize from this baraita because you don't know what the original context of the baraita was. Sometimes there are baraitot that get passed down, but it's part of an oral tradition, and you have to know the teacher, because the teacher will tell you this is the context in which this law was said. And maybe it was only true in a case where the courtyard of the borrower is right next to and farther away from the street, from the main thoroughfare, so more inside from the courtyard of the lender, and therefore when he sends it, it's going to get there for sure. In other words, it's not like, let's say there's a street and there's a courtyard of the borrower and the lender are both in courtyards that are off of the main thoroughfare. In that case, when the owner hits the cow, it's going to have to make its way through the public thoroughfare, know which way to go, maybe it has to make a right, make a left, doesn't know where to go, and finally get to the courtyard of the borrower. So in that case, it's not likely that, it could make it, but it's not likely that the lender is really going to agree to take responsibility in that case. So, however, if it's not that case, but the cow doesn't have to go through the public thoroughfare at all, that both of their courtyards are back to back next to each other within one cul-de-sac that extends from off of the main thoroughfare, and therefore he just sets it on sway and hits it not towards the main street, but rather the other way. And then, as long as this goes in a straight line, the cow will make it to the courtyard of the borrower. And so that's the case that we're talking about, where that's a full agreement, and you would say, yeah, just hit it and it'll get here. In that case, the borrower is liable. But in a different case where it's a roundabout path and has to go through other fields or through a public street, then the lender would not fully agree to take responsibility. So you cannot prove from this particular case, to all cases where he just says that. Hold on. If this baraita is only talking about this very specific case, this case is so simple, right? It's obvious. Why would I even need to teach it? And that obvious, if it's right next door and it goes straight, then the borrower would be responsible. La sricha di gaziata mahutetema la samcha daate dilma kayema hata velatya azla lehedya kamashmalan de samcha daate. No, we're talking about a case where there are corners and things that are blocking the way, where the cow might just get into that corner and get stuck there and not make it all the way. It's not simply a straight path. There are obstacles along the way that can prevent the cow from getting there. So I might have thought that the borrower is not going to fully agree to take responsibility because he knows that there are obstacles on the way and it might not get there. So even if he says it, maybe the borrower is not responsible. Maybe the cow will just stand behind one of those obstacles or get stuck in a corner, and he's not going to come straight to the borrower's courtyard. So I might have thought that. That's why I need the Braita to teach me that the borrower, it's okay. It's a small chance that will happen, and he does give his full agreement that he will be responsible to make sure that the cow gets to him, and if something happens on the way, then the borrower will pay if it dies on the way. So yes, in this particular case, we needed to say that, and it might be true only in this case, Rav Ashi says, but this Braita is not necessarily a proof for that the law would be true in general. Amar Rav Huna, Hashoel kardo mechavero baka bo kenao, lo baka bo lo kenao. Rav Huna says, if someone borrows an axe from someone else, once he starts using it and actually chops wood with it, then he has acquired it. But if he has not yet started using it, even though it came into his domain, so he has not acquired it. Okay, that's Rav Huna's statement. We have to analyze this. Lemai, onasin. So acquired it for what? He doesn't own it. He's only borrowing it temporarily. So it's not full ownership. So you mean he acquired it that he would be responsible if something happened to it for ones, which a borrower is responsible, or genebav aveda also. So he becomes responsible once he starts using it. So is that what Rav Huna is saying? Right? See how this is relevant to what we said previously. That also was a question of when does the borrower become responsible? Let's say when it's in transit. Okay, so if so, Maishana parad mishat she'ilah. But then we have a challenge to Rav Huna, comparing it to what we saw above. When it comes to a cow, the borrower is only responsible from the time of, is already responsible from the time of the borrowing. Whenever it gets into his domain, or it gets into the hands of an authorized messenger, already even before the borrower starts using the cow, he's already responsible for onis. Ela lachazara bakabo la maseh hadar be mashil lo bakabo maseh mashil hadar be. Rather, it must be talking about for the law of reneging. If the owner of the axe wants to renege on the deal, if the borrower uses it, he starts chopping wood, then the sender cannot change his mind anymore, right? And say, oh, I know I agreed to it, but I don't want to. No, I already started using it, and we agreed I'm going to borrow this for a month. So then the owner cannot renege. But if the borrower did not use it yet, did not chop wood with it yet, then the owner can say, listen, I know I gave it to you, and I just dropped it off, and it's in your house, but you didn't start using it. I changed my mind. I don't want to lend it to you. I want it back. Then he can take it back. So that's what Rav Huna was talking about. Upeliga de Rabbi Ameh, damar Rabbi Ameh, hamashil kadom shel hekdesh, ma'al lefi tobat hana'ah shebo, chavero mutar lebakea bo ulechatechila. So we're going to see that this statement of Rav Huna, that the owner can renege all the way until the borrower uses it, does not agree with the opinion of Rabbi Ameh. And Rabbi Ameh is going to prove it from the following case. Someone borrows an axe that is hekdesh. So the owner, the guy owned an axe that was consecrated. He didn't know it was hekdesh, and then he lent it out, and he found that later. So ma'al, he commits me'ilah. He's responsible to bring a korban and to pay the amount that he stole from Kodesh. How much does he have to? How much is he liable for? According to the financial advantage from lending out the axe, right? If when someone lends it out, he's not taking any money. He's lending it out for free. But the borrower is like, I owe you one. So how much is that I owe you one worth? How much can he come back later and say, remember I lent you my axe? Okay, now can you do this for me? If you put a monetary value on that, it's not the full value of the axe. The axe maybe is worth $100. The value of lending it out, it might be worth $5. Okay, so he commits me'ilah, and the me'ilah is the valuation is $5. That's what he will have to pay, plus a penalty to hekdesh. However, once he lends it out, the borrower is actually allowed to use it lechatechila. The reason is that when you have a consecrated item, so the first moment that one commits me'ilah, that's a big sin. Okay, he did it by mistake. Okay, still it has its serious consequences. But once you use it, then that's it. Then it becomes chulin. So the owner, the lender, he committed me'ilah by giving it out. but the borrower, now that he gave it out and already committed me'ilah, so now the axe is not considered consecrated anymore, and the borrower can use it. Okay, so now from what point does he commit me'ilah? According to Rav Huna, it would only be from the time that he actually used it, not from the time of the transfer. So let's see. So if the borrower does not yet acquire it, just when it's transferred into his domain, let's assume he didn't use it yet, then why did the owner commit me'ilah, misusing temple property? And why do you say that the borrower is allowed to use it lechatechila? Let's say we have a simple solution. You realized that this is hekdesh. Okay, just return it. If the owner can renege on the deal, he says, "Oh, listen, I lent you that axe, but I just realized it was consecrated, and you can't use it. Give it back to me." And since he is allowed to renege, so there never was a borrowing and never was no one never committed me'ilah. The axe never became non-consecrated, and so it'd be easy to undo the problem and fix it so that there never was a problem. If you followed Rav Huna, but that's not the law, right? You see that the law, Rabbi Amet didn't say that's the law. Rabbi Amet assumed that from the moment that the owner of the axe gives the axe to the borrower or transfers it into his domain, that's it, that he already committed me'ilah, and there's no reneging on that, and therefore the owner is responsible to pay and bring korban, and the borrower can then use it. So we see that Rabbi Ameh would not agree with Rav Huna. Ufeliga de Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Kedesh shetinu b'shicha b'lakochot, kach nigum b'shicha b'shomerim. Rav Huna also will not agree with the statement of Rabbi Elazar, because he said that just like the sages instituted that to buy something you actually have to pull it, right? The sages said it's not enough just to pay for something, but they actually want the owner, the buyer, to pull the item so that there's no misunderstanding in case something happens, it gets burnt in his loft, and then the seller won't even bother to save it because he already got the money for it. So it leads to fights. So the rabbi said, okay, you can't acquire something unless you physically make an acquisition and pull it, or an acquisition like that. So too, the rabbis instituted that you have to pull something for a shomer. In order for a shomer to actually acquire an item such that he would be responsible for it, so he actually has to pull it. So we see that according to the Elazar, it's the pulling, it's the transfer of the item into his domain. Then that's it. That makes the acquisition, and from that point on, he is responsible. And from that point on, the sender, the owner, cannot renege on the deal. So we see that Rav Huna is not the same as Rabbi Elazar would not agree with Rav Huna. Tanya Mehachi, we have a baraita that supports the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. The baraita's exact same words as what he said. Just like the rabbi said you have to pull something in order to buy it, so too they said you have to pull something to be a shomer. One of the shomerim is a borrower or a renter. So, but once it's pulled, then that's it. Then he acquires full responsibility, and the sender cannot renege on it. וכשם שקרקע נקנית בכסף בשטר וחזקה, כך שכירות נקנה בכסף בשטר ובחזקה. The Braita goes on and says, just like land can be acquired through paying money, by writing a contract, or by using it, working the land or locking the gate, so too rental can be acquired through transfer of money with a contract or by using it. So we just questioned this last part of the Braita. Sechirut maya bidete. What do you mean rental? Rental of what? How can you, if you're renting a cow, then you need to pull it. It's the same thing as buying a cow. Just money is not going to work. Amar Rav Chisda sechirut karka. So Rav Chisda explains that when we say rental here, we mean rental of land. When you want to rent land, so even though we agreed verbally, that doesn't actually create the acquisition. You actually have to do something, and either pay the money, write a contract, or the person who's renting it should use the land. And once he does that, then the transfer is complete, and the renter is responsible, and the owner cannot renege on his agreement. אמר שמואל, היימן דגזיל חביסה דתמרה מחברו, ויתבע 50 תמרה, אגב הדדה מזדבנן ב50 נכי חדה. חדה חדה מזדבנן ב50. Shmuel has a rule, someone that stole a whole cake of pressed dates from his friend. That's how they used to preserve dates. They would dry them out and stick them all together to make one big pressed cake. And someone steals that from his friend. And let's say there are 50 dates in this cake. Now, and how much does he have to pay back is the question. Now, if you sell them all together, you sell them in bulk, like from Costco, then you have to pay 50 minus 1. You get a discount for buying in bulk, and you only have to pay 49. Whereas if you sell them one by one, then you would sell them for the full 50. So the question is, if someone steals a whole cake of 50 dates, how much does he pay? The bulk price or the individual price? And the answer is, it depends. Lehejot mishalem 50 nechi chada. If we're talking about lay people, non-hekdesh, one person owns it, another person steals it, he has to pay back the 49, the bulk price. להקדש משלם 50 בחומשיהו, מה שאין כן במזיק. דלה משלם חומשה. תמרמור ואיש כי אוכל קודש, פירת המזיק. If he steals it from Hekdesh and eats it, and benefits from it, then he has to pay all 50 plus, since it's Merilah, he's going to have to bring a Korban also, and he's going to have to add a 1/5 penalty above the 50. So we see that there's a difference between Hejot and Hekdesh. Shemuel saying that the law, if they're both stealing, one is stealing from a regular person, one is stealing from the Bet HaMikdash, and so in either case he has to pay back. But when you pay back a lay person, you can use the lower amount. They're both valid ways of counting, but use a lower amount, the bulk price. Whereas when you pay Hekdesh, then Yad Hekdesh Al Yonah. So the rights of Hekdesh are preeminent, and therefore he has to pay back the full 50 plus everything else related to Merilah. Now, he notes also that there's a difference between someone who steals and personally benefits from something that's Hekdesh versus someone who causes damage to it. Let's say his ox or he or whatever causes damage to these dates. He doesn't benefit from it, but he caused damage to it, then he does not have to pay the added 5th, because the pasuk says clearly only if someone eats kodesh, eats or benefits from, then because he benefited from it, he has to pay. But if he caused damage, although he does have to pay the hekdesh back for the damage, but does not add a 5th. Okay, so that's Shemuel's basic law, that we're more stringent regarding Hekdesh than for Hejot, when there are two different ways of calculating how much the theft was worth. מתקיף לה רבבי בר אביה, להג'ותם משם 50 נכי חדה, נמלא אנה חדה חדה, הווה מזבנינה להו. So Rabbi bar Abaye challenges this law of Shemuel and says, when you're paying back a hejot, how come you pay back only 49? After all, the victim of the theft can say, listen, I was planning on selling it one by one. That's my business. I buy it in bulk, then I sell it one by one. I can make 2 perutot at the end of the day. So you pay me 50 because that's the loss that you caused me. Amar Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua, Shamin bet se'ah be'ota sadeh tenan. Rav Huna, son of Rav Yoshua, answered from a Mishnah back in Baba Kama that says that we appraise based on the area required to sow 1 se'ah of seed. The case here is where someone caused damage. Let's say someone has a big field, and the animal came and caused damage to one particular area of tomatoes, and so he damaged 200 tomatoes from this. Now, if you have to pay for those 200 tomatoes directly, so then how much are they worth, right? You'd calculate how much 200 tomatoes are worth, and maybe they're worth $50. Okay, so you have to pay $50. But we don't calculate it that way. Instead, we look at the entire field. How much is this whole field worth? If you just buy the whole field with all the produce on it, let's say it's $100,000 to buy the field. So now, how much was it worth before the damage to these tomatoes and after the damage to these tomatoes? Well, is it going to be $50 less? Or usually when you're buying something in such bulk, it's like, the small difference up or down is not going to make so much of a significant difference. And therefore, when he pays back, you see that when it comes to lay people, and this is not Hikdesh, it's just regular lay people, we don't assess the damage to the individual items, but rather we assess it in the context of the larger thing. And so that assessment is going to be lower. And so therefore, if we apply this Mishnah to the case here also, when he steals something, we follow the bulk price and not the individual price. That's the deal. Oh, so you were gonna sell them individually for one each and for 50? Okay, now you're only getting 49. Go buy another bulk and then you'll sell that. So that's the law. So we're able to respond to that. No problem. But now we have another challenge to Shemuel. Is this to say that the law regarding paying back a regular person is different, more lenient than paying back something that belongs to Hekdesh? V'hatenan. Here we have a Mishnah in Masechet Me'ilah. Natal ebeno koram hekdesh lo ma'al. Netana l'chavero hu ma'al v'chavero lo ma'al. Bena'ah betoch beto lo ma'al ad sheyadur tachteha b'shaveh peruta. If you have a temple treasurer, he's a treasurer himself, and so he collects things for the Bet HaMikdash. He's always dealing with such items. And so now, let's say he picks up a stone or a beam that belongs to Hekdesh. He does not commit Me'ilah because he's allowed to. He's moving things around. Someone came, he donated a beam. Okay, the temple treasurer takes it, he puts it in his courtyard, he's picking it up. That's not Me'ilah. He's not benefiting from it, and he's just moving it around like you normally would do. However, if the temple treasurer gives it to his friend, gives it to someone else, then the temple treasurer does commit Me'ilah, and his friend does not commit Me'ilah because he can't give it to someone else. It's like, a teller in a bank is allowed to move money around. That's their job. They put it here, they put it there. But if he takes money and gives it to his friend who doesn't work in the bank, then obviously that's theft from the bank. So this would be Me'ilah. Now, if the temple treasurer takes the beam and he builds it into the structure of his house. So let's say it's on his property anyway, right? So okay, he can move it around. He can move it from here to there on his property. So let's say he puts it upright, he puts some things on it, and he makes a structure out of it. It's still on his property. So is that considered Me'ilah right away? The answer is no. Until he lives in it and gets at least one piruta's worth of benefit from that, whatever that item is. If it's a beam or something on the roof, he gets some benefit from it, then he commits Me'ilah. Since doesn't commit Me'ilah just by moving it, it's only until he actually uses it. That's what the Mishnah says. Now, Vitev Rabbi Abu Kamed Rabbi Yochanan, Vitev Ka'amad Mishemed Shmuel. And so, Rabbi Abu was sitting before Rabbi Yochanan, and he was saying that the following statement in the name of Shmuel, Zot omeret, Hadar b'chasar chabero shelo midato, sarich la'alot lo sachar. He says we can derive from this Mishnah in Me'ilah that just like over here, the temple treasurer, as long as he didn't benefit from it, from the structure, he's not liable. And so we're considering it as if the Hekdesh, Hekdesh, who owns Hekdesh? Hashem. So, but there's no person that owns it. So we're considering it as if this is a case of that the Hekdesh does not know about this situation. So he says, so too, someone who dwells in the courtyard of his friend without the knowledge of the owner of the courtyard, if it was with his knowledge, right, the owner of the courtyard sees him there and allows him to remain in the courtyard and sleep there and all that, well then that's with his permission. But if it's not with his knowledge, he's away, doesn't even know about it, then even though you could say the dweller is benefiting, and the owner doesn't lose anything, it's just some empty space in the courtyard anyway, he wasn't using that area, and nevertheless he has to pay rent. He didn't give him permission, he has to pay rent. How do we derive this from here? Because here also, whenever the temple treasurer, once he sits in that structure that he made using sacred beams, so that's considered benefit. Even though you might say, well, he's not. No one's losing anything. The hekdesh is not losing anything, and so maybe you'd say, he benefits. The temple treasury doesn't lose anything, so he doesn't have to pay. We don't say that, right? We say that's called me'ilah, using something without someone's permission, without their knowledge, is considered a benefit that you have to pay for. So we apply the same thing here. So here, now here's the challenge. Over here we see that Shemuel equates the two laws and says, if this is true for Ekdesh, then it's also true for Hejot. But beforehand, Shemuel said that the laws are different, that the laws of Ekdesh are more stringent than the laws of Hejot. And so, if Shemuel really thinks that they're different, then how could he derive this? You might say that the law for Ekdesh is more stringent, that's why he has to pay, this is considered Me'ilah. But maybe for Hejot it would not be so. So we have a contradiction. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hadar be Shemuel mahi. Rabbi Yochanan explains that Shemuel changed his mind regarding this item. At first he thought that you could derive it, but then he realized, no, that's not true, you cannot derive it. And the reason that you cannot derive it is, according to the principle that we saw above, the Shemuel thinks that Hekdesh is more stringent and it's not the same as the laws of stealing or benefiting from a Hejot. And so now everything is reconciled. But we ask, wait, how do you know which one Shemuel changed his mind about? How do you know that he changed his mind regarding staying in someone else's courtyard, that you can't derive that? Maybe he actually thinks you can derive it, and the laws are the same, and he changed his mind regarding the dates, and he said over there the laws are the same. No, it must be that he changed his mind regarding residing in the courtyard, because we have a principle that Rava said that when you take something from Hekdesh without knowledge, that's equivalent to taking something from a common person with knowledge. The idea is that, back to what we said before, who owns Hekdesh? Hashem. Hashem knows everything, and therefore you have to assume that Hashem did know. So whatever the law is regarding Hekdesh, without knowledge of any particular person in the priestly hierarchy, that would be the same. Since Hashem knows, that would be the same as taking something from a friend who does know about it. And that's why it must be that Shemuel changed his mind regarding staying in someone's courtyard, because there's really then no way at all that you could derive one from the other. Staying in someone's courtyard with his knowledge, that means with his permission. So that means surely you would not have to pay. The guy gave me permission. He didn't say, look, I'm sleeping here for 3 days, and the guy didn't tell me anything. That means he's okay with me sleeping here. So that would be the equivalent of Hekdesh, where Hekdesh, without knowledge, meaning without asking permission from any temple treasurer or anyone, that's the same as Hejot with knowledge. And that's why in the case of Hekdesh, that's considered me'ilah, and that's not equivalent to staying in someone's courtyard without their knowledge. So you see that Shemuel definitely changed his mind regarding this. There's too many problems linking these two together, and the Rava is even a bigger problem. And so therefore, surely Shemuel changed his mind about that. And so in the end, Shemuel thinks that the laws of Hekdesh and Hejot are in fact different. Amar Rava, haneshikulaedet baru chabita dechamra lechen va'a beyoma deshuka mizdabena bechamesh bishar yomeh mizdabena be'arba. Now we have one more law about someone stealing something, but that has different prices. Now the different prices are not because it's you bought it in bulk or individually, but rather on different days. So you have these porters, the movers, they broke a shopkeeper's barrel of wine. They're supposed to move from here to there, and they broke it. And they're responsible. They were negligent. Okay, so now how much do they have to pay back? Well, it depends. See, how much is the barrel of wine worth? On market days, where there's more demand, there's more shoppers, then you can sell it for 5 dinar. Whereas on other days, you can only sell it for 4 dinar. So what do? If they are going to return the barrel of wine on a market day, then all they have to do is give him back an actual barrel of wine, and he can sell it for 5, so then that's for sure good. But if they want to compensate him on other days, they have to give him 5, not 4. Even though on that day he could sell it for 4, yeah, but he missed out on the day of selling it on a market day for so that he could have sold it for 5, and so they have to pay him back 5 because that's what he was missing out. However, this law is only true if the shopkeeper did not have other barrels of wine to sell, because then he could say, listen, I asked you to bring the barrel of wine, let's say on Sunday, to the marketplace so I could sell it on Monday, that's the market day, and I would have sold it for 5, but it broke, and so now I lost out on 5, so therefore you have to pay me 5 no matter what day it is. That is a legitimate claim. However, if the shopkeeper has more barrels of wine in the store that he didn't sell, that means that he was not, the porters did not cause him 5 dinar worth of loss, right? He just didn't have enough customers. He could have sold a different barrel instead. So therefore, if he had other wine, so he could have sold that wine, and therefore they did not cause him a loss of 5. They can pay him back just 4. And in addition, whatever they pay, whether they're paying 4 in this case or 5 in the usual case, they can also deduct the value of tidha, of the shopkeeper's effort. It takes a lot of effort to sell. He has to be out there all day and, measuring it out and convincing people and all that. And also the cost of tapping it, of putting a faucet onto the barrel. That also you have to, that's a professional that comes around and does that. And so whatever that was worth, the porters do not have to pay him for that, because now he saved on that money, saved on those costs and on that effort, so they can also deduct that amount from what they pay back. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.